$8,214. That's not the price of my car. That's the amount that got added to my price after I signed, after I shook hands, after the salesman told me, and I quote, "You're all set. You got a great deal." I didn't find it that night. I didn't find it the next morning. I found it 11 days later at my kitchen table at 11:47 p.m. with a calculator app open on my phone and a stack of paper so thick it needed a rubber band. I want you to understand something before this story even starts. I am not a lawyer. I am not an investigative journalist. I am not, by nature, a confrontational person. Before this happened, I would apologize to a chair if I bumped into it. That version of me does not exist anymore, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why, because what this dealership did to me, they had done to hundreds of people before me. They just picked the wrong customer this time. They thought they got away with it. They were wrong. My name, for the purposes of this story, is going to stay private, along with the exact name of the dealership for legal reasons I'll explain later. But everything else, the numbers, the documents, the timeline, the outcome, every bit of it is real, and I kept receipts. Literal receipts, because it turns out that's the one thing car dealerships never expect a customer to actually do. This is the story of how a finance manager tried to bury $8,000 in a stack of paperwork he assumed I'd never read, how I built a case file that looked like something out of a fraud investigator's desk, how a 58-second video turned into 11 million views, and how a company that thought it was untouchable ended up cutting me a check with the state attorney general's office watching over their shoulder. Stick around, because the moment where I found the smoking gun and a stack of paperwork, that's not even the craziest part of the story. If you're new here, this channel is about one thing: people who took financial advantage of someone and the ordinary person who fought back and won. Today's story is about greed, about a sales culture built on confusion and pressure, and about getting every single dollar back, plus a little something extra for the trouble. If stories like this, the ones where the little guy actually wins, are the reason you're here, do me a favor and subscribe, because I've got dozens more of these, and new ones every week. Hit the bell too, because some of these dealership tactics I'm about to show you, they are actively happening to someone in your city right now, today, while you're watching this. All right, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to why I even walked onto that lot in the first place. The situation. I need to set the scene because the reason this scam worked on me is the same reason it works on almost everyone. I was in a hurry and I was tired. My car, a 2013 sedan with 161,000 miles on it, had thrown a check engine light for the third time that month. The mechanic, a genuinely honest guy who'd fixed my cars for a decade, looked at me and said the words nobody wants to hear. "It's not worth fixing anymore. The transmission's next, and that's a $2,000 job on a car worth maybe $3,000. I had a job that required a reliable commute, 40 minutes each way, no public transit option, no carpool. I had, at that point, about $9,000 saved for a down payment, decent credit in the low 700s, and a very specific, very reasonable budget. I wanted a payment under $450 a month on a car priced somewhere in the $24,000 to $27,000 range. That's it. That was the entire plan. Nothing exotic, nothing aggressive. I wasn't trying to flex on anybody. I just needed a car that would start every morning. How the trust was built. I want to walk you through exactly how this dealership, I'll call it by the name I used internally in my case file, Sterling Auto Group, which is not their real name, built trust with me, because if you've ever bought a car, you are going to recognize every single one of these moves. Move 1. The friendly greeting that isn't random. I was greeted within maybe 90 seconds of stepping onto the lot by a man I'll call Danny, mid-30s, extremely warm, extremely complimentary about my eye for a good used SUV. Salespeople are trained to approach fast, not because they're eager, but because a customer who's been standing on the lot alone for 5 minutes starts thinking clearly. A customer who's immediately being talked to does not. Move 2, the "let's just see what you qualify for" trick.
Before I'd even picked a car, Danny suggested we run your info real quick, no obligation, just so we know what you're working with. This is the credit pull before negotiation trick. Once a dealership has your credit pulled and has a pre-approval number in hand, the entire conversation shifts from "what does this car cost" to "what payment can we get you at," which sounds like the same thing but is a completely different negotiation, and it benefits them, not you. Move 3. The manager already fighting for me. About 20 minutes in, Danny disappeared to talk to my manager and came back saying, "Good news, he's willing to work with us on this one, but he wants to meet the numbers guy today, not have you come back." This creates two false impressions: that a manager is personally advocating for you, and that today, right now, is the only day this deal exists. Both are manufactured urgency. Move 4. The payment, never the price. For the next hour and a half, every single number Danny said to me was a monthly payment. $430, $460. If we stretch the term a little, we can get you to $410. Not once, not one single time did he say a total vehicle price out loud. This isn't an accident. Focusing on payment lets a dealership hide fees, add-ons, and inflated interest rates inside a number that still feels affordable, because $430 a month sounds fine even when it's attached to a wildly overpriced total. Move 5. The paperwork blitz. When we finally sat down to sign, I was handed what I later counted as 14 separate documents in under 20 minutes. The finance manager, I'll call him Rick, talked fast, flipped pages fast, and repeated one phrase constantly. "This is just a formality. Sign here, initial here, we're almost done." I want to reconstruct that room for you as best I can remember it, because the pacing itself was a tactic. Rick's office was small, windowless, with a single overhead light and a desktop monitor angled so I couldn't easily see it. He had a stack of paper already printed and squared off before I even sat down, meaning the numbers had been decided before I walked in, not negotiated in front of me. He'd slide a page toward me, tap a spot with his pen, say something like, "Just initial there for me," and before I'd fully processed what I'd initialed, the next page was already sliding into place. At one point, I asked, genuinely just trying to be thorough, "Can I get a second to actually read through this?" Rick smiled, glanced at his watch in a way that felt performative, and said, "Totally, take your time. I just know Danny's got another appointment waiting on this desk in a few minutes, so whenever you're ready." That single sentence did more work than any hard sell could ever have. It didn't tell me to hurry, it just made hurrying feel like the polite, considerate thing to do. Two specific exchanges stick with me. When we reached the page listing the Sterling Shield Protection Package, I did ask what it was. Rick's exact response was, "That's just some added protection on the paint and interior. It's honestly one of the better deals we offer, and it's already folded into the payment we already talked about, so nothing changes for you." Notice what that sentence does. It answers a vague version of my question while quietly avoiding the actual price, and it reassures me that nothing changes, which was true only in the sense that the number I'd already accepted had never been broken down for me in the first place. The second exchange was about the arbitration agreement. I remember asking, half joking, "What is this one?" and Rick saying, "Oh, that's just standard. Everybody signs it. It's not really anything." An arbitration agreement is, in plain terms, a clause that can waive your right to sue in open court and push disputes into private arbitration instead, a process that overwhelmingly favors the company that drafted it, since they often pick the arbitration provider and have far more experience with the process than a first-time car buyer does. Not really anything was, to put it mildly, a significant understatement.
The test drive and the first real warning sign. The car itself was a 3-year-old mid-size SUV, silver, 34,000 miles, priced on the windshield sticker at $24,995. That number matters. Remember it, because it's going to keep showing up, and it's going to keep meaning something different every time you hear it. During the test drive, Danny talked almost the entire time, not about the car, but about me. Where did I work? How long was my commute? Did I have kids? Was this just for me or for the family? At the time, it felt like friendly small talk. I understand now that every one of those questions was qualifying information: my job stability, my income bracket, my likely credit tier, and, critically, how much monthly payment I could plausibly be talked into believing was normal for someone in my position. When we pulled back into the lot, Danny said something I now recognize as a textbook line. "Okay, so let's go inside, get you some water, and figure out numbers. But full transparency, whatever the sticker says, we can usually do a little better than that for a serious buyer like you." That phrase, full transparency, got used, I later counted from memory, 6 separate times over the course of that evening. Not once was it followed by an actual complete price. The manager who was already fighting for me. About 20 minutes into sitting down, Danny excused himself. "Let me go talk to my manager, see what we can do." He came back 4 minutes later, visibly a little out of breath, and said, "Okay, good news. He's willing to work with us on this one, but he really wants to meet you before we lock in the numbers, because he doesn't do this for everybody." A manager I had never met, and would in fact never meet by name for the rest of that evening, was suddenly personally invested in my deal. This is a manufactured relationship designed to make you feel like you have an ally in the building, someone rooting for you against an invisible corporate structure, when in reality, the manager and the salesperson are on exactly the same side of the table, and it isn't yours. The red flags I missed. Looking back, and I promise you'll be nodding along with some of these, I never once saw an itemized out-the-door price before I sat down to sign. I signed a document called an arbitration agreement without reading a single word of it because Rick said everybody signs this, it's standard. The word protection package came up twice, and both times I asked what it was, and both times Rick said, "Don't worry, it's already built into your payment, it's a good thing to have," which is not an answer to the question I asked. I noticed my final payment was $471 a month, $21 over my stated maximum, and I remember thinking, close enough, which is exactly the moment scammers are trained to identify and push through. The moment money changed hands. At 6:59 p.m., I signed the retail installment contract. I put down $7,000 in cash, nearly all my savings, financed the rest, and drove off the lot in a car I was told cost $26,480. I remember Rick shaking my hand and saying, "You did great today. This is a really clean deal." I believed him. I drove home that night feeling like a responsible adult who'd made a smart financial decision. I want you to remember that phrase, a really clean deal, because in about 12 minutes of runtime, you're going to hear it again, except this time it's going to make your skin crawl. The first crack. 11 days after I bought the car, I was doing something almost nobody does, reading my full loan documents front to back, because I wanted to double-check my payoff amount for my old trade-in loan, and that's when I found the smoking gun. Buried on page 7 of a document titled Itemization of Amount Financed, a page Rick had flipped past in about 4 seconds during signing, was a line item I had never once heard spoken out loud in that entire dealership visit. Sterling Shield Protection Package, $3,995. Below it, Nitrogen Tire Fill and Paint Sealant, $1,295. Below that, Dealer Prep and Processing Fee, $1,199. Below that, Gap Waiver Addendum, $895. And then, almost hidden in a font size smaller than everything around it, VIN Etching Theft Deterrent, $625. I added them up right there at my kitchen table. $3,995 plus $1,295 plus $1,199 plus $895 plus $625. $8,009.
$8,009 in add-on products and fees that I never asked for, was never clearly quoted, and critically, never separately signed off on with my own initials next to the price. My initials appeared on the page, yes, but they appeared on a page where the itemized costs had been folded into a single financed total, meaning my signature technically covered the page, but I had never seen these 5 line items individually before that night. I remember sitting there for a full minute just staring at the paper. I read it again and again. I opened my banking app to look at my auto-pay amount, then opened a calculator, then closed it, then opened it again, because some part of my brain refused to trust the first result. I remember my hands were slightly shaking, which felt like an overreaction for a piece of paper, until I did the math a third time and got the exact same number. I want to describe the specific emotional sequence because I think it matters for anyone going through this right now. First came disbelief, then a kind of hot embarrassment. How did I not catch this? And only after that, maybe 20 minutes later, did the anger arrive. That order matters. Scammers count on that embarrassment phase lasting long enough that you talk yourself out of pursuing it. It's probably my fault for not reading closer. Maybe this is just how car buying works. I want to be very clear right now, early in this story, it is not your fault for trusting a system that is deliberately built to be confusing. The confusion is the product. This is what's sometimes called packing the payment or loading the deal in the industry, and in some jurisdictions, depending on how it's disclosed, it can cross the line from an aggressive but legal sale into a Truth in Lending Act violation or a state unfair and deceptive acts and practices violation, depending on exactly how those fees were presented at the point of sale. The scale of the damage. Let me put this in real terms, because $8,000 sounds like a headline number until you translate it into what it actually does to a loan. I had financed roughly $19,400 after my down payment. Adding $8,009 in undisclosed products meant my actual amount financed was closer to $27,400, meaning I was paying interest at 7.9% over 72 months on $8,000 of products I never agreed to buy. Run that math, and the true cost of those add-ons, once you include the interest, was closer to $9,850 over the life of the loan. Nearly $10,000 for tire nitrogen, a fabric protectant I never requested, and an etching kit that costs the dealership, by industry estimates, less than $60 to actually perform. There's also something almost worse than the money, and if you've ever been through something like this, you already know what I'm about to say. The feeling of having been played. I'd shaken this man's hand, I'd thanked him. I remember thinking on the drive home how lucky I was to have found a good one, a dealership that didn't feel sleazy. That feeling curdled into something close to nausea when I did the math at my kitchen table. The first attempt to resolve it, and the wall I hit. The next morning, I called the dealership and asked to speak with Rick. I was calm, I explained the line items, and I asked politely for an explanation and a possible adjustment. Rick's response, almost word for word, "Those are standard products, they're on every deal we do and you signed for them." I asked to see where, specifically, I had agreed to the price of each individual item separate from the bundled financing. He said he'd have to check with the finance director and would call me back. He did not call me back. I called again 2 days later. Different person answered, a receptionist who informed me Rick was not available and that all these questions go through the general manager, whose name, conveniently, she couldn't give me, and whose voicemail, when I finally got the number, was full. I called a third time 4 days after that, and this time I asked directly, "Can you just tell me the general manager's name so I can send something in writing?" There was a long pause on the line, the kind of pause where you can practically hear someone deciding how much to tell you, before she said, "I'm going to have someone call you back," and hung up before I could respond. Nobody called back. I tried a fourth approach. I drove to the dealership in person on a Saturday, specifically because Saturdays are the busiest sales day, and I wanted to see how a live customer complaint got handled on the actual floor. I was met this time by a man in a polo shirt with a lanyard who introduced himself only as one of the sales leads, who listened for about 90 seconds, nodded a lot, and then said the sentence that I now consider the unofficial motto of this entire dealership. Yeah, unfortunately, once it's signed, but let me see what I can do, no promises. He took my number, he did not call. By this point, I had made, by my own log, 7 separate contact attempts across 17 days and received exactly 0 substantive responses. Not a single person had actually addressed the $8,009 discrepancy directly. Every interaction ended in a deflection, a transfer, or a vague promise to look into it. I want to pause here because this is a pattern you will see in almost every one of these stories. The initial contact is warm and fast, and the moment there's a problem, the same company becomes a maze of transfers, voicemail boxes, and people who are conveniently in a meeting. How the dealership covered its tracks. Here's what I didn't understand yet, but would piece together over the following weeks. First, the way the paperwork was structured, the add-on products were disclosed on a separate itemization page from the main contract summary, technically present but positioned in a way clearly designed to be skimmed past during a fast signing session, not read. Second, when I requested a copy of my complete signed paperwork by email, which I am legally entitled to, I was sent a PDF that was missing 2 pages, including, conveniently, the itemization page I'd already found in my physical copy. When I pointed this out, I was told it was just a scanning error and a complete copy would be sent. It took 19 days and 4 more emails before I received it, and when I did, one of the missing pages had a slightly different font on the total line, a detail I'll come back to because it turned out to matter enormously. Third, and this is the part that made my stomach drop, I posted a short, honestly kind of ranty video on social media, just venting about my situation, no names mentioned yet, just describing what happened. Within about 6 hours, 3 separate accounts with generic names and no post history commented some version of "this happens to everyone, just move on," and "you signed the contract, that's on you." I didn't think much of it at the time. I would later find out, through a genuinely wild coincidence I'll explain shortly, that this exact pattern of coordinated damage control comments had appeared on other former customers' complaint posts going back over 2 years. At this point, about 3 weeks after purchase, I had an $8,009 discrepancy I could prove existed on paper, a dealership that wouldn't return calls, an incomplete document production that got corrected only under pressure, and a growing, uncomfortable sense that I wasn't the first person this had happened to. That's when I stopped being a frustrated customer and started being an investigator.
Becoming the detective. I want to be honest with you. I didn't wake up one day with a plan. It built, piece by piece, the way I think most of these things do. Each wall I hit made me angrier and more methodical, not less. The first thing I did was something anyone can do, and if you take one practical thing from this video, let it be this. I requested my complete deal jacket in writing by certified mail, citing my state's consumer protection statute and my right to my own contract documents. Certified mail matters because it creates a time-stamped, legally provable record that the request was received. A phone call creates nothing. A letter with a signature on delivery creates a paper trail a lawyer can use. Building the paper trail. Over the next 2 weeks, I built what I started calling, half-jokingly, and then not jokingly at all, the case file. It included my original signed retail installment contract with every page timestamped by when I received each copy, the itemization page with the 5 undisclosed add-on line items highlighted and cross-referenced against my recollection of the actual sales conversation, a call log, date, time, name of representative, and summary of every single phone call I made to the dealership, because a pattern of ignored contact attempts is itself evidence of bad faith.
Screenshots of the coordinated "just move on" comments on my social post with account creation dates, because several of those accounts had been created within days of each other months earlier, a pattern that, once I saw it, I could not unsee. A side-by-side comparison of the two versions of my complete paperwork I'd been sent, with the font discrepancy on the total line circled in red. Digging into the coordinated comments. Before I get to the font discrepancy, because that's the big one, I want to walk through something smaller that ended up mattering a lot more than I expected. Remember those 3 generic accounts that commented "this happens to everyone, just move on" my early name-free venting post? I decided out of pure stubbornness to actually click into each profile. All 3 had been created within an 11-day window, roughly 14 months earlier. None had more than a handful of posts. 2 had, at some point in their post history, left nearly identical comments, same phrasing, same slightly too formal tone, on 2 completely unrelated local news posts about unrelated consumer complaints, in the same metro area, one with a different auto group entirely, and one with a home renovation company. That told me something important. Whatever this pattern was, it wasn't exclusive to my dealership, and it wasn't personal. It smelled, frankly, like a reputation management service, the kind some businesses quietly hire to suppress bad reviews with generic, deflecting comments. I couldn't prove who was paying for it, and I never tried to. That wasn't my fight. But I screenshotted everything, dated it, and added it to the case file, because a documented pattern of coordinated, inauthentic activity around consumer complaints is exactly the kind of context a regulator finds useful when deciding whether a business is a repeat, organized offender or a one-off bad actor.
Let's talk about that font, because this is the moment the whole story cracked wide open. The first complete copy I received had a total sale price line in one typeface. The second copy, sent 19 days later after I complained about missing pages, had that same line in a very slightly different, but noticeably different, font weight. That's not something a normal person would ever notice. I only caught it because I'd printed both copies and happened to lay them both side by side on my kitchen table under bad lighting, and the numbers looked slightly bolder on one. I brought both printed copies to a print shop and asked, out of pure curiosity, whether they could tell me if the documents had been generated by the same software at the same time or edited afterward. The tech there pointed out that one document's metadata, visible in the PDF properties, showed a modified date 3 days after the created date, while the other file's created and modified timestamps were identical. In plain English, the second copy of my paperwork had been edited 3 days after the original document was allegedly generated and sent to me as though it were simply a fresh scan of the same original file. And that's when I found the smoking gun. Consulting a lawyer. At this point, I made 2 calls in the same afternoon. The first was to a consumer protection attorney who offered a free initial consultation, many do, specifically for auto fraud and lemon law cases, because these cases often include fee-shifting provisions, meaning if the customer wins, the dealership can be on the hook for the attorney's fees, not just the damages. This matters because it means many of these attorneys take strong cases on contingency at no upfront cost to the consumer. The attorney I spoke with after reviewing my documents used a phrase I will never forget. This isn't just a bad deal. This looks like a pattern of practice case. She explained that isolated overcharges happen, a single mistake, a single confused customer, but a modified document sent specifically in response to a complaint suggested the dealership had a process for handling complaints that involved altering records, not just correcting them. The second call was to my state's Attorney General Consumer Protection Division, where I filed a formal written complaint attaching my full case file. I want to note something important here for anyone in a similar situation. Filing a complaint with your state AG's office is free, and it creates an official record that can be used later even if the AG's office doesn't personally intervene in your individual case.
Many people don't realize that a single AG complaint often gets logged into a broader pattern tracking system, meaning your complaint, even if it doesn't get you a personal callback, might be the third or the 40th complaint against the same dealership, and that number matters enormously to regulators deciding where to focus. The intake specialist who took my complaint asked me a question that gave me chills at the time. Has this dealership given you a case or reference number for your complaint with them internally? I said no, nobody had ever given me anything close to a reference number, just a string of unreturned calls. She said, without elaborating, "Okay, just so you know, that's consistent with some other things we've seen." I didn't push for more because I understood she couldn't tell me about other people's complaints, but that one sentence confirmed something I'd already started to suspect. I was not the first call they'd gotten about this exact dealership. I also, on my attorney's recommendation, sent a formal written request under my state's consumer records statute demanding the complete, unaltered original deal jacket, every document in its originally executed form, along with any internal notes related to my account. This is a step a lot of people skip because it sounds intimidating, but it's often just a short, plainly worded letter citing the relevant statute, and it puts a dealership on notice that you are treating this as a legal matter, not a customer service inquiry.
Going public. 3.5 weeks after my discovery, with my attorney's blessing, and after being told the dealership's corporate office had, again, gone silent for over a week, I posted the video that changed everything. It was 58 seconds long. I filmed it in one take, no editing, sitting at the same kitchen table where I'd found the fee. I held up the itemization page, I said the number out loud, $8,009, and I said the words, "I signed for a car. I did not sign for this." I did not name the dealership in that first video, on my attorney's advice, to avoid any claim of defamation before the facts were fully substantiated. I described the location generally and showed the documents with identifying details covered. That video got 4,000 views in the first hour. By the next morning, it had passed 600,000. By the end of the week, it had crossed 11 million. The near miss. Here's the part of the story that genuinely could have gone the other way. 48 hours after the video went viral, I received a phone call, not from Rick, not from the general manager, but from someone identifying themselves as the dealership's regional operations director. He was friendly, almost too friendly. He offered to make this right immediately with a refund of $4,000 on the condition that I take the video down and sign a non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement within 24 hours. I want to be honest, in the moment, that offer was tempting. $4,000 is real money, and the pressure of a viral post is exhausting in ways nobody warns you about. Strangers messaging you at 2 a.m., local news requesting comment, it's a lot. But I called my attorney before I responded to anything, and she said something that reframed the entire situation for me. If they're offering half the money to make you go quiet within 24 hours, that tells you they know the full number is real, and they know silence is worth more to them than the other half of your refund. In other words, the speed and size of the offer wasn't generosity, it was evidence. A company confident it had done nothing wrong does not offer a rushed, half-measure settlement with a gag clause attached. I declined the offer in writing through my attorney, and instead we sent a formal demand letter, full refund of the $8,009 in undisclosed fees plus the associated financed interest, or we would proceed with both a civil claim and continued cooperation with the Attorney General's ongoing pattern investigation, because by that point I'd learned I was not the only complaint on file, far from it. The numbers come out. Here is where this story stops being about just me. Within 10 days of my attorney's demand letter, and I have to assume not coincidentally, within days of the video crossing 11 million views, the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division confirmed publicly that it had received complaints from other consumers describing an almost identical pattern at the same dealership group. Undisclosed add-on products bundled into financing, itemization pages presented too quickly to review, and delayed or altered document production on request. The investigation that followed identified, according to the AG's later public statement, dozens of similar consumer complaints spanning roughly 2 years, with estimated undisclosed fees across those complaints totaling several $100,000 in aggregate. Local news picked up the story about 2 weeks after the video crossed its first million views. A reporter reached out to me directly, and with my attorney's approval, I gave a short on-camera interview. Careful, factual, no speculation, just the documents and the timeline. The dealership group's response when the reporter asked for comment was a 2-sentence statement about being committed to transparency with every customer and continuously reviewing internal processes, the kind of statement that says nothing while sounding like it's saying something. I remember watching that clip and thinking about how many times I'd heard some version of transparency from Danny on the very first night, and how hollow the word had become to me by that point. Around the same time, I started receiving messages, dozens of them, then hundreds, from other people in the same metro area and eventually from other states entirely, describing versions of the exact same story. A friendly salesperson, a payment-only conversation, a rushed signing, and a 5-figure or 4-figure surprise buried in the itemization page weeks later. I couldn't verify every single message, and I was careful not to present unverified claims as fact in anything I posted, but I forwarded a folder of the most detailed, most documented messages to my attorney, who passed relevant consenting individuals' information along to the AG's investigators, since a pattern of practice case is built on volume, not just one strong story. The resolution. My individual case was resolved through a formal settlement reached before trial, which included a full refund of the $8,009 in undisclosed add-on products and fees, reimbursement for the additional interest I'd paid on that inflated loan amount, calculated at just under $1,900 up to the settlement date, a revised loan document reflecting the corrected, true amount financed going forward, a payment covering my attorney's fees, which, because of the fee-shifting provisions in my state's consumer protection statute, did not come out of my settlement amount at all. All told, between the direct refund, the interest reimbursement, and the corrected loan, I recovered right around $10,200 in value. The twist, what the money was actually used for. Here's the part that still gets me, even now. During the discovery process, the exchange of internal documents required once a formal legal claim is filed, my attorney obtained internal sales training materials from the dealership, buried in a training slide deck under a section literally titled Maximizing Front-End and Back-End Gross, was a monthly incentive structure that paid finance managers a direct personal bonus scaled to how much protection product revenue they packed into each deal, with a noted internal target of no fewer than $1,500 in back-end product per unit, ideally $3,000 plus on approved credit tiers. In plain terms, Rick wasn't improvising when he buried those fees. He was following a documented, structured incentive program that financially rewarded him personally for hiding as much cost as possible inside every single customer's loan. The $8,009 wasn't a one-off mistake or an aggressive upsell that got out of hand. It was a bonus-generating system, and I was simply a line item in someone's monthly commission sheet. That detail, once it became public as part of the case record, is genuinely what accelerated the regulatory side of this story from consumer complaint to pattern of practice investigation. A single overcharge is a mistake. A trained, incentivized, repeated system is something regulators take a lot more seriously. Where things stand. As part of the broader regulatory resolution, the dealership group entered into a consent agreement requiring, going forward, mandatory itemized, separately initialed disclosure of every add-on product and its price before any bundling into financing, a formal complaint response timeline enforced by the state, and periodic compliance reporting to the AG's office for a defined monitoring period. I want to be careful and precise here because this matters. This was a civil and regulatory resolution, not a criminal conviction, and no individual at the dealership was criminally charged as a result of my case specifically. What I can tell you is that the pattern of practice was formally acknowledged in the settlement documentation, and the compliance monitoring is real and ongoing. My own recovery. Financially, I'm whole. Actually, slightly ahead once you count the interest reimbursement. Emotionally, it took longer. For months after this, I read every single document handed to me in any transaction, apartment lease renewals, phone contracts, even gym memberships, line by line, out loud if I had to, because the instinct to trust a friendly person across a desk had been badly shaken. I've made peace with that. If anything, I think it made me a more careful adult in a way I probably needed anyway.
Warning signs to watch for. If you take nothing else from this story, take this list, because I built it the hard way so you don't have to. If every number you're given is a monthly payment and never a total price, stop and ask directly for the full out-the-door price in writing before you discuss financing at all. If a salesperson says any version of, "Don't worry about it, it's standard, everybody signs this," that is your cue to actually read it. Ask specifically for a full itemized breakdown of every add-on product with its individual price, and ask what happens if you decline each one. Legitimate add-ons should be optional, and a dealership should be able to remove them from your total without hesitation. Never sign financing documents in a rush. You are legally entitled to take your paperwork home and review it before signing, and a dealership that resists that request is telling you something important. If you ever request your own signed documents and receive an incomplete or altered copy, save everything. Timestamps, emails, PDF metadata if you can access it, because that discrepancy alone can become the center of a case. File a written complaint with your state attorney general's Consumer Protection Division, even for what feels like a small issue. Your complaint may be the one that finally establishes a pattern regulators can act on. Final word. They thought a customer who didn't ask questions during a fast signing session would never go back and read the fine print. They thought a delayed phone call and a full voicemail box would make the problem disappear, the way it apparently had for other people before me. They were wrong, and now, because of a paper trail, a font discrepancy, and 11 million people watching, they're not doing it quietly anymore. If you've ever been overcharged, upsold, or straight-up scammed by a dealership, a contractor, a landlord, or anyone else who thought you wouldn't notice, I want to hear it. Tell me what happened in the comments. Some of the best stories on this channel started exactly that way. Subscribe if you want to see the next one, and remember, read the fine print every single time.